Just in time for the weekend before Halloween is Spirit Folk, a ghost story if viewed from the point of view of the holographic townsfolk. After all, learning that you're a plaything subject to the whims of the Voyager crew is right up there within the mouth of madness, don't you think? Things begin simply enough, with Tom Paris riding through the Irish town of Fairhaven on an out-of-control primitive automobile, which establishes right away the attitude towards this place, that this is one big video game, and Tom is having fun mucking about with technically period-fitting but clearly disruptive behavior. Which is fine, because this is one big video game, despite the assertion in the craptastic previous story called Fairhaven, which was suggestive that these are, basically, life forms no different than the EMH. As discussed at length, this is not only inconsistent with their own fiction, it's morally repugnant. The idea that they are creating living beings and twisting them for their own amusements is so shocking an idea, it makes Section 31 look like the Roddenberry ideal by comparison. At least Sloan does what he does because he wants to preserve the Federation. He doesn't act like Kilgrave on steroids like our heroes would be to these characters that they create. So given the choice between the crew of Voyager are monsters and this show is just stupid, I'm going to be generous and go with option 2. During the teaser, Seamus, the guy who confessed to repeatedly violating the commandment against murder because they apparently know less about Catholicism than they do about Chakotay's homogenized religion, he warns about the Queen of the Fairies coming out at night, spots Tom repairing the damaged car seemingly by magic, and is horrified. So after the titles, he heads to Sullivan's to tell a gathered crowd all about this. They are skeptical on the grounds that he is famously full of shit.
Next thing you'll be telling me is, you want to pay for your own drinks.
Come on, let's not leave fantasy for lunacy here.
Oh, leave it alone, Seamus. Can't one day go by without you making an ass of yourself?
Harry Kim asks himself that every night before he cries himself to sleep. But Seamus mentions another town, which invited strangers in, only they turned out to be spirit folk, and the place was slowly wiped out until even the town itself had just vanished. The discussion is interrupted by Janeway's arrival, as most plots usually are. That's right, you rubes better remember who can replace this town with a dinosaur cockfight arena, and I have a hankering for a rumble in the Jurassic jungle. Meanwhile, Harry has a date with one of the holographic characters, Maggie, and there's nothing wrong with that, other than the fact that Harry Kim has replicated flowers. Real flowers for a fake girl. That's like buying a new tie to give to your vibrator. Torres has an opinion on these things.
If you ask me, that whole program is an accident waiting to happen.
Much like Harry's date. Running the program around the clock is causing problems, which just proves how awesome Quark's holosuite is, given that Vix ran for months without problems, while Fairhaven has run for less than 2 and is causing no end of issues. Now sure, there is a size discrepancy at work here, but the brand new state-of-the-art starship is having trouble keeping up with a small-time bar. The more we learn about Voyager, the more I think this ship was built solely to get somebody reelected. You know how it works. The gel packs are made on Beta Z. The plasma manifolds are made on Earth. The consoles are made on Andoria. And this unneeded piece of junk was just rushed through to ensure the midterms went well and that they could say that they were developing state-of-the-art ships, even though their holodecks are inferior to one that was patched with a spatula. During Harry's date, his best friend, Tom Paris, decides to sabotage it, knowing that Harry has a long history of relationship issues, so him possibly finding some happiness out here must naturally be halted immediately. Again, this is Harry's best friend. I am not saying that ironically, I'm saying it as the sad fact that it is. So Tom turns Maggie into a cow just as Harry kisses her, a gag which should tell you everything you need to know about Voyager's sense of humor. Only Seamus and his partner in crime, Milo, have been following Tom and are convinced that this is fairy magic. The next day we're treated to the doctor giving a sermon, and you might be surprised to learn that a non-human atheist isn't terribly good at that. But given that this place is inexplicably devoid of any Christian iconography, they've apparently determined that the religion of Fairhaven is miscellaneous. Chakotay's religion is a hodgepodge, whereas Ireland's religion is just vague spiritualism in a stone building. You might be saying, well, I don't want religion in Star Trek anyway. And sure, that's fine. So it lends itself to the more natural question, why is this even here? Nothing is benefited, and the sermon doesn't even have a connection to the episode plot that could be allowed to justify it. So why bother? If you don't wish to show something for what it is, why are you showing it at all? And if you're saying, this is a holographic version anyway, well, yes it is. So why are all the inhabitants of Fairhaven white? I'll tell you why. Limited thought. Just like on Enterprise with Lone Star, everyone in Fairhaven is Irish because it's simple and direct, and the church is just a building housing vague religion because it's simple and direct. And that bugs me because it's the kind of thing that doomed Star Trek in the end. Intellectual laziness. If you don't want to bother with it, don't do it in the first place. Don't half-ass it. Give your audience a little bit of credit. Thank God, pun very much intended, that this is interrupted by the arrival of Seamus and Milo dragging in Maggie the cow. And it is altogether fitting that they are bringing around a live cow, because it meant that for once on Voyager the bullshit they were shoveling was literal. The Doctor restores her, and she recounts the tale in detail, just in case we've fallen asleep, which admittedly is a fair assumption. Milo and Seamus head to Sullivan to discuss this, and other people talk about the strange things involving the Voyager crew. Sullivan comes to their defense, but says that he will handle things more reasonably. So that night, when he's with Janeway, he broaches the topic, first by giving her a book about the Queen of the Fairies.
Will this have anything to do with your reading suggestion?
As a matter of fact.
Don't tell me. They say I'm the Fairy Queen.
They've probably seen Gargoyles, so that would explain it.
They could tell me you're the devil himself, and I wouldn't care.
I would never compare me to that amateur. But he has some hard questions, which she doesn't want to answer, so she shuts down the program. And that's a perfectly reasonable reaction, because Sullivan is not real. He doesn't deserve answers, because he's a simulation. His reactions to her are simulations of reactions. And right now, that simulation is malfunctioning. So they handle it like a technical problem, calling the Sullivan character to the lab for analysis and repair, just like was done in Fairhaven. Only this time, Sullivan is active. That's not because he's malfunctioning, it's because they've decided to turn on the malfunctioning program on purpose. And surprisingly, he malfunctions. I wonder how that could have happened. The problem is the perceptual filter. The character is seeing things as they are, while the writer apparently was having problems doing the same. Harry thinks that he fixes it, but surprise, surprise, he fails, and Sullivan fakes being fixed so they'll leave him alone. But to fix all of them one at a time would be tedious, although I'm sure we would love to film all of that for the audience to see. The only way that they could do this properly would be to do it from inside the program. And the program has to be running because, fuck you, it does. They soon figure out that Sullivan was faking, before anyone gets knifed, thankfully. Well, they work out a new algorithm. While they discuss this, they also mention that Sullivan may be out telling others what happened. And their solution, then, is to use it on Sullivan first to ensure that it's working and also to prevent matters from getting any worse. No, wait, sorry, that's my solution and that of every member of the audience who have the advantage of not being complete boobs. They're going to head in there anyway and just assume that everything will be perfectly all right, because the comedy is them looking like idiots. And if you want to look like an idiot, you've got to think like an idiot and act like an idiot. And Voyager has had years to get that down to a science. And speaking of science...
Hate to break the news to you, Michael, but I'm a starship captain and you're a 300 deciwatt holodeck program.
A deciwatt is a tenth of a watt. So besides the fact that what she just said was the same as, that oil change will cost you 300 dimes, it means that powering his body and personality requires just slightly more wattage than a Hitachi magic wand, which never asks you awkward questions and always knows how to find the clitoris on the first try. Anyway, these numbnuts are so stupid that, despite knowing that the holodeck is malfunctioning, despite knowing that Sullivan knows of their plans and might be telling others, despite more than a decade of holodeck malfunction so notorious Harry Kim actually learned about some of them at the Academy, despite all of that, The town of Fairhaven was turned on when they sent Sullivan back and kept running the entire time for Tom and Harry to discover the problem, write a new code, discuss that with Janeway, and change their clothes. In other words, everything possible to maximize the chances of something going wrong. Remember that on this show, the manual for boning other species is the size of a phone book. And yet it would seem that protocols on dealing with a malfunctioning holodeck are non-existent, because what they're doing makes no sense whatsoever from a safety perspective. This is so contrary to human nature, it's unbelievable, even allowing for some changes that might have taken place. Think for a moment about this. In real life, the chance of a child lost for good or dead because they were kidnapped in public by a stranger is statistically non-existent. It's less than the number of people attacked by sharks. And people still freak the hell out over that possibility, right? Because it's so terrifying to think about it. In Star Trek, you have the possibility of people being slaughtered by their own creations. And it's completely the other extreme. Holodecks malfunction so often it's a cliche, and we have seen only 2 spaceships and a space station, but it happens all the time. Multiply that by the number of other ships we don't see, and by the number of other space stations out there, and all the ones on all the planets in all of the Federation. People should be picketing over these things. There should be a manual on dealing with holodeck safeties that comes in multi-volume sets. In reality, Tuvok should be here to remind them that the protocol says that if the holodeck protocols are compromised in any way, they need to repair it from the lab rather than turning it back on. And then maybe you can have Tom and Harry sneak back in there anyway because they want to save themselves an entire day's work and don't really want to accept the danger of the situation. At least that would say that by now they've learned something instead of continuing to make the same tired mistake over and over again. And even then, Tom and Harry could have avoided this situation so easily, you just want to throw your hands up at the behavior of these boobs. First, let's assume the worst case scenario, that this port is a simulated control panel present in each program, like a GUI, so they can't do it with the program offline. And those controls cannot be relocated to, say, a rock in the middle of nowhere. And that they can't fix the program unless they're online, and they can't fix any of those subroutines unless they're running. Even then, there's a reason they're assumed to have magical powers. They have total control over this world. Why not make it 3 in the morning with a heavy rainstorm to ensure nobody is going to want to be out of bed or even outside? Then, once they get in the bar, delete the bar doors and windows to ensure that any nosy people are not going to come in there and interfere. And then they can get the job done quickly and safely. This is not the benefit of hindsight. This is the benefit of experience. How many times do you have to slip coming out of the shower before you put down a bath mat? So the only reason Tom and Harry are caught by this mob of villagers is because they're stupid and lazy, which is altogether fitting because it describes the creation of this episode. To continue the contrived nature, the holographic shotgun destroys the port, causing the safeties and controls to go offline. But what more is there to add? This situation is so obviously author fiat, I'm almost surprised Tom and Harry didn't throw the net over themselves. The rest of the crew discussed the situation. Tor is in favor of pulling the plug, and if anything in Fairhaven gets damaged, then so be it.
They're not people. They're holograms.
And they weren't programmed to be violent. I don't believe they'd harm anyone.
They also weren't programmed to notice things outside their experiences, but they are, aren't they? There's a special kind of frustration when someone presents as wisdom the most obvious and shocking stupidity. I can't even satirize this because my made-up Janeway would need a lobotomy to approach this level of moron.
You can't be certain.
Well, I am certain, and I'd like to find a less drastic solution.
With all due respect, Captain, Michael can be reprogrammed. Tom and Harry can't.
Please take a moment to appreciate that the smartest thing said so far this conversation was by someone who once failed to identify manure with a tricorder.
One problem at a time, B'Elanna. The people of Fairhaven may not be real, but our feelings toward them are.
And do you have any feelings for Tom Paris and Harry Kim?
Of course, just like that goldfish I had at the academy, which I traded to Boothby for some of his Romulan marijuana. Oh, that was the good stuff.
The most she is willing to do is to have Torres standing by to shut it down if necessary. But when someone is threatening to use guns on innocent people, meaning that the time between decision and death is 2 or 3 seconds, and you can resolve this without loss of life, then it's necessary now. Any hostage situation that can be resolved by scratching a Blu-ray is a hostage situation that should already be over. Let me continue with something that I brought up with the look at Fairhaven. I mentioned that I was very personally attached to my Commander Shepard in Mass Effect and worked my ass off to get the best possible ending on the off chance I might save the character from death. If I had 100 such characters I was that attached to, and the only chance to avoid them being corrupted and lost was to risk the life of two strangers dying of AIDS, it would never remotely be considered. Real human lives trump my feelings for a fictional character. And you have to be literally a sociopath to think otherwise. You have to have lost the capacity to recognize the existence of others outside yourself to think this is a good idea. People have asked why parody Janeway seems to have grown more extreme over the years. Well, look what I'm up against! This is an arms race of crazy! She's the USSR and I'm fucking Belgium! So the Doctor is sent in to handle this, with the expected scenery chewing.
Sinners! Sinners! All of you. You have the audacity to turn a house of worship into a prison?
How dare you defile Our Lady of generic spiritual stuff? You'll surely be damned to some nondescript unpleasant punishment for this. Well, they're not buying it. They know he's a member of the crew and tie him up too, taking away his mobile emitter, so now he's integrated with the program, and thus infected with their stupid. So he is soon hypnotized by a swinging spoon and forced to answer the truth, although none of it makes much sense. But far worse is that the Doctor is part of the Fairhaven program now, and while it's not stated, this would imply that he could be damaged as well if they shut it down. Yep, could have ended this with nothing more than a scratched disc, but nope, now we have to decide between the lives of actual sapient beings. Your incompetence, Captain, would make Jar Jar Binks slow clap while shaking his head. Sullivan puts on the mobile emitter with the Doctor's help and gets accidentally beamed to the bridge. Janeway spills the whole story to him, more or less, and just in time to find out the villagers are going to burn the hostages at the stake, despite the fact that they weren't programmed for that. Either none of this is happening, or Janeway is an imbecile who shouldn't be captain of an inner tube. You decide. Also, enjoy this unintentionally dark humor.
Katie showed me things that are beyond our comprehension. They have machines that I can't begin to describe, but not once have they used them against us.
Mr. Sullivan, why don't you ask your wife if Janeway has ever used one of these machines against your people? Or does being murdered and having every trace of your existence expunged not count? But they, of course, don't know about that, so everything is hunky-dory. Janeway decides to let the characters remember the insanity of the last several days, because, why not? That certainly won't lead to another malfunction. And they'll all head back inside before making repairs, because safety's a 4-letter word around here. The post-episode follow-up. Stupid Neelix's moment is his only appearance, but it's fitting since he is the first to justify not pulling the plug on the holodeck. Neelix coming to the defense of your story is like offering up Stephen Hawking as your champion in a boxing match. It's probably a little late to add this, but I really should have sooner. Spirit Folk gets a Red Ring of Death award for, in this case, having a malfunctioning holodeck and having holodeck safeties fail. Final score for Spirit Folk is 1 out of 10. This one gives Threshold a run for its money. Whoever said death is easy, comedy is hard must have seen this episode, because death sure came close and comedy was nowhere to be found. Even leaving aside the stereotypical Irish folk who are overwhelmed by superstition, yeah, that's not offensive, this has an idiot script and character assassination. Even Janeway fans belittle her over this. To quote Michelle Erica Green, I was so embarrassed for Catherine Janeway, and by extension anyone who still admires or relates to her, that I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Season 6 was not good for Janeway. It started with her consumed by a desire for vengeance and ends with her getting herself assimilated. It showed her blaming Seven for her own actions, forcing people to relive committing war crimes, ridiculing and eye-rolling over people who dare to think differently than her, and now has risked human lives and their only doctor to protect her holographic real doll. Jerry Taylor may have made her a Mary Sue at times, but at least her judgment wasn't that bad.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!
I'm afraid.